Mm-hmm.
All right, all good. I think we're ready to get going here. Thanks, Gong. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Welcome to TRB AMS 50 Economic Development and Land Use very first webinar in 2024. Today's topic is residential location and housing and transportation costs. Very timely project, very timely topic just given the recent ruling on the National Realtors Commission costs, and also, just in past few years, the rising costs and inflation in general. So this is a very timely topic for us here. A little bit about the AMS 50. Our committee chairs, Nori McDonald and Michael Lawrence. The webinar is moderated by Professor Guang Tian and myself, Kate Ko. Our committee's scope focuses on the impact of transportation, on the economy, environment, and society. It's concerned with the efficient, effective, and equitable transportation system that promotes competitive advantage, economic resiliency, and sustainability for our cities, regions, and societies. This committee provides a cross-cutting forum for practitioners and researchers to understand the interrelationship between transportation, economic development, and the economy, land use, and the policies and management approaches required to create sustainable growth at the national, regional, and local scales. Okay, slide. To join our future events and webinars, please go to mytrb.org, go to committees, click on Becoming a Friend of AMS 50, and click on Become a Friend so you start receiving notification about these webinars. When you have questions about the presentation itself, you can either use the chat function and type in your questions, or you can raise your hand virtually during the time of the Q&A session, and we'll unmute you. Just a reminder, our last webinar was 2023, November 2023, on electrification in transportation, presented by Dr. Salima Sultana and Gregory Carlton of UNC Greensboro. And I'll put in this link of our YouTube channel so that you can take a listen or watch the video there. So let's turn to our presentations today. Dr. Dong, please pull up your presentation. So first up, we have evaluating the impacts of TOD on household transportation expenditure in California. Let me stop sharing my screen here so you can go ahead and pull up your slides. So a little bit about the presenter here. Dr. Hongwei Dong is a professor in the Department of Geography and the City and Regional Planning at Cal State University, Fresno. His research interests include land use regulations, real estate and housing, and transportation. Dr. Dong has published in well-read planning and transportation journals and is actively engaged in externally funded interdisciplinary research. Notably, he successfully led a research grant awarded by the National Science Foundation. And over the years, he has successfully completed multiple transportation research projects that were supported by the Cal State University Transportation Center SB1 research grants. Dr. Dong, we're ready for you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Tian and Dr. Ko for your invite. It's my honor to present with the AMS 50 seminar series. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
You can? Okay,
Yes,
great.
Thank you.
So thank you for the introduction, Dr. Ko. As Dr. Ko introduced, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Geography and City and Regional Planning with the California State University, Fresno. Today, I'm going to present my research on the impacts of TOD on household expenditure, transportation expenditure in California. So we know that housing and transportation are the two largest items in household expenditure in the United States. On average, an American family spends about a third of their income on housing and another 16% on transportation. So together, housing and transportation account for about a half of the average income in the United States. The housing affordability, as Dr. Ko introduced, is at a historically low level. Home prices have been growing very fast in the past decade, surpassing the growth of income for American workers. The housing affordability crisis is particularly a problem in California, particularly in coastal cities in California. A lot of workers, even the middle-class workers, they cannot afford living close to their workplace. They have to drive long distance to fringe, exurban areas, even outside of the region, to afford a home. So they constantly have to make a trade-off between transportation and housing costs in California. I know a lot of workers, they drive more than 50 miles. Like they live in Stockton, but they work in Silicon Valley. They drive at least 1 to 2 hours one way to work. Recently, the Californian policymakers have realized TOD as an important policy tool to address the affordability problem. And the TOD can be a useful policy tool in at least 2 ways. One, if you allow more housing, denser housing to be built in transit service areas, you increase housing supply and ease the pressure of rising housing price. And secondly, by allowing more people to live in TOD neighborhoods, they have better access to transit, they can drive less, and they spend less money in transportation. So that's called one stone, two birds. In 2021, California state legislatures passed a package of 3 acts, SB 8, 9, and 10. And SB 10 is particularly relevant to this research. So basically, SB 10 said that Californian cities can choose to authorize construction of up to 10 units on a single parcel, regardless of zoning code, and without requiring an environmental review. Basically, make it much easier to build denser home surrounding transit stations. So my question, the research question I ask here is how much people can save by living in TOD neighborhoods. And this is the framework that guided my research. So by living in TODs, you may choose to own fewer cars, more efficient cars, and you drive less by using more transit. So in that way, you could save money on vehicle ownership cost, maintenance cost, operating cost. So basically, you save money on cars. And then you spend a little more on transit. So I want to know what's the net cost saving here. Well, on the other hand, which is not covered by the research, is that we know that if you want to live in a TOD neighborhood, you may have to pay a premium. And that means if you happen to be a renter, you may have to pay a little higher rent. So if you save money on transportation, but you pay more rent, so what's the overall night cost saving? Well, but this is not the question that this research project answers. This project focuses on this part, okay? So this research is a statewide study covering the 4 largest metropolitan areas in California that have rail transit. So basically this study, I focus on rail transit and ignored bus transit. The data is primarily is based on the 2010 to 2012, the last round of statewide household travel survey. I accessed the confidential version of this data set through NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. With this data set, I have information about the vehicle ownership and the auto trips and transit trips for each household on a single day. Because I also need to know the purchase cost, the fuel efficiency of each car, I relied on 2 databases. One is a DOE fuel economy database. The other one is a database I downloaded from kiko.com. And then for transit fare price, I relied on the websites of more than 30 transit agencies in California, plus a national transit database. So these are the data sources. For this research, the data part is the most time-consuming part. I spent probably at least 70% of my time on collecting data, cleaning up the data. So the research, I want to know how much money people can save by living in TOD. So first, I have a bunch of, more than 2,000 households who live within half-mile network distance of a rail transit stop. So they are the TOD households. And then I identify control households, so basically a control group. They are non-TOD households, but they are similar to TOD households in 2 ways. One is that, so basically I identify 2 control groups. Control group 1, they are similar to TOD households by social demographic variables only. So here by social demographic variables, I consider household size, number of workers, number of drivers, their household income, education, home ownership, and the types of homes they live in. And control group 2, they are not only similar to TOD by social demographic variables I just mentioned, they are also similar in terms of neighborhood environment, like neighborhood density, mixed use, distance to the city center, and the neighborhood income. So these are 2 control groups I use. One is by social demographics only, and the other one is by social demographic and the neighborhood environment. And then I compare their travel behavior and their expenditure on transportation by paired t-test and regression. I have to use regression because the propensity matching cannot match the treatment and control group perfectly by every variable. So I have to control some variables that are not perfectly balanced through propensity score matching. So what do I mean by transportation, or how do I measure transportation cost or transportation expenditures? So I consider 3 categories. One is vehicle ownership cost. The other one is operating cost. And then the third is a transit cost. And under this ownership cost, I consider depreciation, I consider financial charge, insurance, and a registration fee. And then the operating costs include two parts. One is the operating cost. You have to burn fuel, right? So the fuel cost. And then you do maintenance, the repair, and the tires. And the transportation, the transit cost is the transit ticket price you have to pay. So I'm not asking you to read the numbers in this table. I'm just trying to show you the three comparisons I make. One is I compare the TOD households with all the non-TOD households in California. Basically, this is before matching. So TOD versus average Californian household. This comparison does not make a lot of sense because, as I mentioned earlier, TOD households and non-TOD households are different in many ways. So if you compare TOD households with average Californian family, basically you are comparing apples with oranges. So the results of this comparison don't tell us much. The focus is this two. One is the TOD households and the non-TOD households who are very similar to them by social demographic variables. And then the control group two, they are the non-TOD households who are similar to the TOD households by both social demographics and the neighborhood environment. And here are the findings. So the data and analysis show that TOD households, they own fewer cars. They also more likely to own more efficient cars. They drive less, but the difference turns insignificant after controlling for neighborhood environment. That means if you control TOD households with similar non-TOD households by social demographic variables, TOD households drive significantly less. However, if you compare TOD households with households in the second control group, who are similar to them both by social demographic variables and neighborhood environment, that difference turns insignificant. And if we convert this vehicle ownership, operating, and driving behavior into money cost, these are the results. So the TOD households spend less on vehicle ownership. The operating cost is also lower for TOD households. However, if you compare TOD households with the households in the second group that are similar in terms of both social demographic and neighborhood environment, the difference is insignificant. And of course, TOD households, they spend a little more on transit fares. So on average, TOD households spend $6,814 on transportation each year. That's their annual cost. Average Californian household who don't live in TOD areas, they spend $11,000 on transportation. The households in the first control group, similar social demographics, they spend about $8,000 on transportation, and households in the second control group, they spend $7,243 on transportation each year. So how much you can save by living in TOD? Well, that's $1,232 saving each year. $429 because you have access to rail transit, and $200 because of the neighborhood environment you live in. So that tells us that, so that means among this $1,232 saving, only 35% can be linked to access to real transit, and 65% is because of the less car-oriented neighborhoods you live in. So this leads us to the old question: does TOD means T, transit? Well, this research tells us that even without real transit, which is very expensive to build, you still can save people money by building neighborhoods that are less car-oriented. That means it is a little higher density, a little more mixed use, a little more pedestrian friendly. So that's the major conclusion I draw from this study. So basically, many other factors can help people to save money on transportation beside real transit. So basically, that's the conclusion I make from this research. The results of this study has been published in the Journal of Transport Geography. You can download, or if you don't have access, email me. This is my email address. And that's my presentation. Thank you, Dr. Tian and Dr. Go.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Dong. Guang, usually you moderate the Q&A, but I just want to read off what we have so far in the chat and turning it over to you, Guang. So Philip has asked from the start of the presentation about government subsidies, right? How would the transportation costs be affected by increased transit, given that transit is often subsidized? My understanding is that when we talk about the HNT index, or transportation and housing costs, this is really to the household itself and not societal overall costs. That's my understanding. Dr. Dong, do you want to take a stab at this question?
Yeah, so if I understand it correctly, this question is related to government subsidy to the transit system. Basically, you are saying that they can save money because the government is subsidizing households live in TOD. Is that the question?
Yeah, or I think in some cases that households might have to pay for the transit by paying high taxes. For instance, California has relatively high income taxes, and there might be some savings on car ownership, car-related costs if there's more transit spending, but that might be largely or totally offset by having to pay increased state income taxes to pay for the transit indirectly.
So tax-wise, we have to consider your housing tenure if you own a home or you a renter. So if you rent, the property tax does not affect you directly. If you own, the question is more interesting, because if you own, you may enjoy I call a double benefit. One is that you have access to transit, you save money on transportation. And then you own a home, and your home have a price premium because of its access to transit. So basically, your house is valued at a higher price. But renter does not enjoy that benefit because you pay rent. In terms of government subsidy, we have to consider that the government also subsidize drivers by building highway, right? Drivers, I don't have the precise number. I don't know how much subsidy that drivers enjoy through the government subsidy, right? So I don't know the number. Yeah.
Figure that out. Well, I probably shouldn't disclose that because if it's not public yet, but I can definitely grab it off the 24th. I think the FHWA and FTA have some numbers for like how much of the highway system is not paid for by motorists versus how much of transit is not paid for by fares and other system generated revenues. So that's kind of interesting. I do realize that I think there's other potential tax mechanisms like income or sales taxes that might fund this too. But yes, that is a good point that the motorist fees aren't enough to fund 100% of road construction.
Yeah, I do have to acknowledge the limitation of this study. It is on the money cost. We also know that public transit has other benefits, like environmental benefits, the social benefits offered by public transit, particularly for low incomes, right? So this study focused on the monetary, the money cost. It has ignored the environmental, social benefits of the transit system. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think overall, I think those two, the good question, and also there are two aspects of the cost and the saving, right? I think the Dr. Dong's paper is more focused on individuals or household from the household side, right? Like the regular, like daily maintenance costs in terms of transporting a household, transporting the housing. Where Philip, I think your question is more about the overall, right? As a society, right? There are costs related, the direct costs related, but also there are indirect costs, environmental, health, social costs related with each of those different modes, right? Public transit and driving, and there definitely need more, right? If we're talking about address the affordability and the environmental impact. That's on the other side. We need to take into consideration all of those costs together. So that's a different angle of looking at the cost. I think we can talk more. I would like to suggest we move forward to the next presentation. Just give both of them enough time, and then at the end, we can open up to more discussion on this.
Great, thanks, Huang. So at this time, I'll ask our second presenter to pull up the presentation. For the second presentation, we have choice or constraint, a locally tailored assessment of housing and transportation costs in Central Texas by Minyu Situ, a Ph.D. student of community and regional planning at UT Austin. She centers her research on facilitating the understanding of how transportation systems and social dynamics enable or constrain people's movements, particularly for marginalized communities. Minyu's dissertation focuses on travel experiences of the racial and gendered groups, seeking to develop improved ways for incorporating those experiences and individuals' perceived travel barriers into more holistic accessibility measures. Take it away, Minyu.
Thank you, Dr. Tian and Dr. K. Just let me know if everyone can see the screen.
We can see, thank you.
Great. So also thank you to the AMS 50 committee for hosting this great webinar. I'm very happy to be here to present this paper, which Dr. Connor and I worked on together. So for today's talk, we will be exploring the modeling of the locally tailored housing and transportation costs in Central Texas. Our focus will be on examining this cost through the lens of travel choice and travel constraints. So transportation and housing costs are important to consider together for measuring the affordability performance. Housing costs might be low in some areas, especially in like the unurbanized area, but transportation costs in those areas are likely to be high. And some individuals might find themselves kind of stuck with the driving simply because there are not too many options near where they live. So the combination of the transportation and the housing cost together provides the fuller picture of the total costs associated with living a particular area than considering the housing costs alone. And 2 national level efforts have been undertaken to estimate the total housing and transportation costs at the neighborhood scale. So these 2 efforts are the H+T index developed by the Center for Neighborhood Technology and the location affordability index developed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So these 2 national level efforts have done a pretty well job in reporting the combined H+T cost at the block groups level. For example, the Center for the Neighborhood Technology has measured the 3 household types, including the regional typical, the regional moderate, and the national typical. And it is characterized by the income, household size, and the number of the commuters. And similarly, the location affordability index model has done the similar measurements, but it expanded its scopes to encompass the H+T cost for 8 diverse household types, ranging from the median income families to very low income families and various professional and family cases. Well, these tools are very useful for people that are thinking about buying a house or for the government that's considering where the development should go. People may judge based on this index to think about if a certain type of households earning in a median income living in this particular block group, what should their housing and transportation costs be? However, it is less useful for considering the conditions that are actually faced by the people living in that area. So one of the problems is that the existing H+T modeling primarily captured the national level data, potentially missing the nuance local variation. For example, the Center for the Neighborhood Technology has captured its vehicle mile travel data estimated from the odometer readings in Illinois. And this weight might overestimate the actual travel conditions in other particular neighborhoods outside of the Illinois. So now to fix this snag, we need to quantify the housing and the transportation costs tailored to Center Texas. We also realize that the same housing and transportation costs may affect a household differently depending on the travel options nearby. So if the individual have the ability to switch their travel alternatives or to reduce their travel cost, then having a high housing and transportation cost burdens is not necessarily a problem that needs the planning or policy interventions. But for those individuals having a high housing and transportation costs, but do not have the ability to change their high cost condition, and it turns out to be a problem. However, the existing tools do not differentiate between these 2 high cost cases through considering the choice and the constraints. And when we look at the literature, there has been a little bit of work looking at this issue of choice and the constraint. For example, Brown's article has looked at survey data and considers the extent to which people are freely choosing to own a car. She split 0-car households into 2 squads, and there are those who willingly skip car ownership because they are vibing with it. And there is the group who is tied on cash and cannot afford a car, and she defined this as the constrained traveler. Also, it is not just about a 0-car choice and constraints. Low-income households may also become the constrained households due to the high car ownership. It is notable that no one really looking at these travel constraint or choice in the housing and transportation cost in that context. So according to the literature review, we are spotting 2 gaps. First, there is the lack of the models better reflecting the local travel conditions in Center Texas. Then there is the issue of not really looking at the travel constrained households deal with when we are figuring out why the housing and transportation costs are so that high. So we are tackling these 2 gaps heads on. First of all, we proposed a local tailored modeling approach that is specifically focusing on the Central Texas, including the 5 counties. They are the Bastrop County, Burnett, Barr County, Cadwell County, Hayes County, Travis County, and Williams County. And then we advocate for considering the household travel burdens when evaluating the high housing and transportation costs through modeling the household's ability of the travel mode switching. So first, we named our housing and transportation models as the UTH+C index. We are looking at the travel costs and the housing costs separately. First, for the travel cost, we consider the cost per mile of driving, the cost per automobile, and the cost per transit trip. To figure out this cost, we use a travel behavior model that we create based on the various data sources, including the auto use, the automobile ownership, and the transit used. And on the housing cost side, we are figuring out by looking at the median gross rent and the median monthly rent, a median monthly owner mortgage cost. And in the end, these two things ultimately combine to create the total housing and transportation cost. Next, I will quickly go through how we tailor this index to Central Texas conditions through the local data. On the housing side, we obtain the housing cost data through the American Community Survey data. But for the travel cost, there's a little bit complicated. So on the transit side, we obtain the fare revenue by local transit providers from the National Transit Database. We combine the ACS and the GTFS data to get a transit fare revenue at the block groups level. And for the expense of the car ownership, this is the place where the previous H+T cost models have had to rely on the national level data. But here we obtain the state level data from the Consumer Expenditure Survey to get automobile related cost by income categories. Then we used our local NPO's travel demand model to get the household level VMT to produce the auto use data. For the next step, we wanted to create a measure that would capture if the people could switch the travel modes. We called it a mode switch propensity. We thought it would be reasonable to operationalize the choice and the constraints through these ideas of the mode switch propensity, because it would be a big difficulty for the individuals if they have the high housing and transportation costs but cannot use any travel alternatives to reduce their travel constraints. So we used the data from the NHTS, the National Household Travel Survey, where they has a question asking whether a household takes public transit, walks, or bike to reduce their transportation costs. To get this mode switch propensity score, we built a binary logic model identifying which factors from the NHTS are linked to this propensity. Once we've got this down, we apply this model into the ACS data, estimating how likely each block groups in our target regions is to switch up their travel modes. So as a result, we can differentiate in the households on two dimensions. On the dimension of the H+T cost, households experiencing the high cost, as defined by the benchmark from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, are those dishing out 45% of their annual income to housing and daily travel. And moving on to the mode switch propensity dimension, households with the high mode switch propensity are those with the likelihood more than 50% of the changing their travel modes to reduce their travel cost. And let's see the results. As a result of our UT index, we compare that with the index from the Center for Neighborhood Technology. The results looks pretty good. Overall, both the CNT and the UT index shows that the household's H+T costs are higher in the western part of the region compared to the east. And as we used most of the local travel behavior data, such as the transit use, car use, and the car ownership cost, the UT index generally reflects that the high-income households living in the Western have higher housing costs, own more cars, and travel longer distance than households in the East. And speaking of those two dimensions, we can sort out our 4 distinct household types. Through these 4 categories, we identify the vulnerable groups as those with the high cost and the low most switch propensity. We call it LH group. They are the ones that need more attention from the planners and the policymakers. Why? Because these folks are more likely to be stuck with those high costs, not by choice, but because they are kind of forced into it due to the limited travel option. So it's kind of like their hands are tied when it comes to choosing how they travel. Now, when we zoom into these 4 household types, this is the table that we summarize for each of the block groups that we identified in all these 4 categories. We summarize their characteristics, such as the household's annual income, their vehicle mile travel, and the automobile ownership. And it turns out that the high-income households are not always associated with the longer driving distance. And surprisingly, it is the low-income households that are the lead in racking up those driving distance. So the longest driving distance in LH groups suggests that these LH groups driving more, not because they want to, but because they have to. Next, let's shift our focus to the race and ethnicity perspective. So this is the bar chart that's showing the share of each racial and ethnic groups in each of the 4 categories we established. So the dark red is the households with the low most switch propensity and high cost. And you can see that for the 2 groups for which it is highest is Black and Hispanic or Latino households. This is the groups that we've identified as being constrained. And they are locked in a high housing and transportation cost and do not have too much travel options. So compared to the white and Asian individuals, Black and Hispanic Latino households are disproportionately experiencing such constraints. And now when we throw these 4 categories, these 4 household types onto the map in Central Texas, households with the high most switch propensity are concentrated in urbanized area. So on the flip side, outside of this urbanized area, we spot a mix of the low most switch propensity coupled with the either high or low cost. And what does this tell us? So the households in these non-urbanized areas are playing a different game. Either they are the high-income individuals voluntarily choosing to live with the limited travel options other than cars, or they are the ones being forced into a high housing and transportation cost due to their limited travel options. So in summary, our research offers 2 contributions to the affordability measures. First, we utilize the local data for building a straightforward H+T model. And second, we also operationalize the choice and the constraints through the most switch propensity modeling, so as to pinpoint the households facing the unaffordable H+T expense. And now, as we transition to the takeaways from our combined modeling, it is clear that the households with the high ability to switch the travel modes do not experience much surprise to travel due to they have the similar VMT. And secondly, the low-income households with the high housing and transportation cost cannot be all classified as the constrained travelers. Why? For the households with the high most switch propensity but with the high cost are the groups who are able to switch their travel modes to reduce their financial burdens, and this might not need more planning interventions. However, on the flip side, the households with the low most switch propensity but with the high cost suggest that they are the groups face the limited travel alternatives likely leading to involuntary expenditure and forced car ownership. And in the end, Black and Hispanic or Latino households are more likely to experience the involuntary travel expenditure. So before we conclude, we would like to express our gratitude to the City of Austin for their support for this work. And our paper will soon be published in the Transportation Research Record later this year. So if anyone have any interest in reading this full paper, we encourage you to check it out once it's available. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation, and thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Minyu. There are a number of questions from Philip in the chat. Philip, just given the time constraint and getting the opportunity for others to ask questions too, do you want to pick one question that you must ask Minyu right now?
I think the one I'm most interested in thinking about is, well, in terms of affordability, wouldn't a better metric be household income remaining after housing and transportation? And then we can look at this relative to what we think households would need for other things like food. And we would see an affordability problem when housing and transportation take out so much income that we see that there's danger of not affording other expenses such as food. So it'd almost be like the right approach for looking at affordability is to difference rather than to divide.
Let's see. So if I understand that correctly, I think because the previous course is looking at the housing costs as the individual measures for considering the affordability. And the reasons that we combine these transportation costs into these measures, because we think like other than the other expenditure, like the travel costs just also take a large amounts of their people's income. So that's why we just want to, especially when we're looking at the low income households, and most of them just when they pick up the residence areas for like maybe the low rent or maybe the low housing costs, but maybe they did not realize that they spent much their incomes on the travel. However, like the governments may not provide a subsidize to those low-income households, just because like they considered if their housing costs just take a small amount of their incomes, then they think they can afford their entire living expense. While we're looking at the travel costs together, we might capture those together.
Yeah, I do kind of agree with your assertion that if the tax system allowed you to like deduct some of the necessary costs, it might be more based on what your net income could be or something. Or yeah, I would say like the ideal poverty line might consider, well, deduct out. It's sort of like the question is more like, can you afford to eat after you've paid for housing and transportation or something like that? And then, yeah, I kind of agree with your idea there.
I'm sorry, because like there's a like missing part for me. So can you just repeat the question again?
Correct. I think I agree with your idea that a conceptually good approach to measuring poverty is to think about, is there enough money left over for other things like food and healthcare after housing and transport are paid for, at least to the extent that transport is like, at least to the extent that transport is driven by necessary activities like let's say, transport for the purposes of earning income or procuring necessary goods.
Oh yeah, so I think I haven't looked at like how they spend that for the necessary groups by using these travel, because like the data didn't shows like their purpose for the necessary goods, like what's their purpose. So that's why we think it would be necessary to conduct maybe the in-depth interview to ask the categories that we want to focus on, that to ask like how much they spent on their travel for obtain their necessary goods, or like the necessary or maybe the essential services in their daily
I think
travel.
the National Household Travel Survey is somewhat good about that, in that you can, if the trip purpose is marked as something like social or recreational, you can see that that's travel as a luxury consumption item rather than travel as a necessary item. But if the travel is marked as like traveling to work, it's much more likely that, yeah, that is travel necessary to generate your income.
Yeah, we considering we think we want to maybe conduct more research on that, and we also think like maybe instead of also just relying on the national the NHTS data, like we think like it would be more necessary for us to maybe conduct the research locally by obtaining maybe the local neighborhoods interview data, so as they might better reflect the local conditions. That is what our purpose for this research, because like we try to narrow down the focus to get these measures to be better reflect the local conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's, like the thought I have after listening to your presentation. I think your methodology and the idea conceptually looks good, but I wonder, right, like how that reflects the reality for those neighborhoods, right? Like they're showing the red on the outside of the urbanized area, maybe doing some like more interviews or data collection from those local people to validate the result you find from this research. Seems like you have that in mind. That would be great. I think in the future it will provide more in the additional information. It's good. Well, there are other questions we can go over there, and I think particularly I think there is a question, yeah, from Philip about Hongwei, your research about have you considered the the propensity matching of TOD and TOD about the distance from work to home? I think maybe that's I think that's a good point, right? Like typically we think about the social demographic, the income, all those stuff, but also like how far are people away from their work, that may be an additional factor there.
No. So the study unit is individual households. Some households, they don't have workers. Some households, they have multiple workers with multiple workplaces. So it is very hard to match household based on their workplace. And commute trips account for about less than 20, probably 18%. Then commute trips account for only 18% of all the trips American people make. So commute is not even the number one trip purpose anymore. So I don't think that's a very important factor to consider in this research framework. If you study individual workers, that could be, but workers only 60% of people work, right?
Right.
Account for only 8%. So I don't think that's a major concern here.
There might be less flexibility to shorten the trip because you would lose your wage income if you didn't show up to work if required to, but like if you wanted to get around, like let's say shopping, having to do shopping trips, you could order e-commerce if it were available in your area, or you could choose the closest shopping point to minimize the trip distance. It seems like you have more leeway to cut down your other trips. There seems to be more ways to cut down your other trips than to like cut out a work commute if you really have to have one. So I feel like work commuting is like maybe it's the most inelastic part of travel.
Right. I think, yeah, I mean, the work, yeah, I think I heard your points, right? Like for other trips, you may find alternatives or, right, like shopping or something, but for work, maybe it's not very, the person is not all the trips, but there's some trips, the working trips is less flexible, like you have to go to work, right? If you don't show up, it's very serious, right? I think that's but on the other side, yeah, I think as we all look at the household survey data, the percentage of work related trips, I think is like a third or something of overall trips. There are definitely I think depending on the purpose of the study, I think you can use different ways to deal with that. I do have another question, given we at our time to Hongwei is a quick questions on that law in California, SB 10. You mentioned is adopted in 2021. There has been like 2 or 3 years. Based on your observation, do you see the effect of that policy at the city level? Like a city start to utilize that law?
Not yet. One, SB 10 is voluntary. It's not mandatory.
Oh,
So
okay.
this basically states say cities can do it. But if a city wants to do it, the city has to adopt ordinance, like zoning ordinance, to adopt this policy. So this is different from SB 9. SB 9 allow single family home parcels to be divided into 2 and to allow multiplex to be built. That's mandatory. You have to do it, like it or not. But SB 10 is voluntary, and they meet a lot of resistance. This is another part of transit. So basically, TOD meet a lot of resistance from both high-income families who live in single-family neighborhoods. They don't want transit to be around in their neighborhoods. And then you have low-income tenants who are concerned about gentrification. So there is a lot of neighborhood resistance to TOD, to transit development in California, and it's not in California, everywhere in the United States. So it's I don't have data. I have not done any research on this topic, but I doubt there has been any significant detectable impact in the past 2 years.
Yeah, understandable. Okay. That's all my question. Anyone else have other question? Okay, good. I think we are just a couple minutes past our time. Thank you both for presenting, and thank Philip for your good questions. We'll post this review this webinar on our YouTube channel, so people can watch that. Thank you all.
All right,
Thank you,
Dr.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.